If you are doing the retake, this will help you kind of figure out some of the things that you need to get done and accomplish. So you correct your application problems. So show teacher and get initial, and that for me that is talking about these additional problems that came on the paper. They're in small print, so you might have to do them on another piece of paper, but you need to get those graded, and that comes along with it. After corrections means your test is corrected. All homework assignments that were incomplete and have been finished. That's all those little pages that from out of that book that some of you did, some of you didn't. If I didn't check it, you still need to show it, so put that stuff together. And then filling out these examples. If you look on your IB formula sheet, you can see some of these command terms. You'll notice that these are things that probably got you on the test. Expression in terms of X, that means it's a formula, you're not solving anything. I do want to talk about profit again. Profit is income minus cost. Profit does not equal income. So if you're looking at profit, you're talking about the graph of profit. If it's going up and down, income and cost are going into that function somehow. So all this area right here is a positive profit. This is where you make no money, and this is where you lose money. So when you're trying to find a maximum profit, you're looking at this point. When you're trying to find break-even points, those are there. Those are all important things when you're talking about economics problems. Factorize means write things in terms of factors. Sometimes it's with an ISE. Means factor, like you did in algebra. Solve, generally I would say solve means set equal to 0 and then find the zeros. Okay, zeros are x-intercepts. That's the only time I would say it's different is when you have a system, and a way to solve a system would be to graph both functions, and then at that point you're trying to find the intersections. So don't always find the zeros. If you're doing a system, you can do it that way. Profit, we already talked about that. Break even. All these kind of go back together with this right here. Now I didn't answer this question. You have to graph it to find where the maximum profit occurs. Solve the system graphically. You want to solve for y in that equation and in that equation. Now on your calculator, when you solve for y, for this one, let's say this is our y1, you don't have to do any simplifying. You can just write that as 277 minus 12x and then divided by 17. And then in y2 you could write 135 minus 5x divided by 11. So you could do everything that you're going to solve and you don't have to simplify. If you'd rather simplify it, go ahead. But when you're doing this method, we're actually going to graph this one and graph this one and see where they're the same. So we're going to find intersections. It's going to be 2 lines. It says verify your selection using algebra. Probably you line these up and do elimination. Your answer is going to be an XY value. Okay, fully factorized, that means write the factors. If you use the X method, if you use guess and check, whatever, you got to be able to factor it. Solve the equation so that, if you notice, this comes from your factors here. Sketch a graph to see if it crosses where you want it to. Okay, that's the first page. Write down an expression for the length in terms of x. That means we're not solving anything yet. We have a picture of a rectangle, and we know the perimeter is 80. The width is x. Expression for x in term, or for the length in terms of x. So what else do we know? We know this is y, or whatever you want to call it. So 2x plus 2y equals 80, and that's not solved for length yet. So to solve it for length, you need to get y by itself. I'm not going to answer a whole question for you. Show that the area of the rectangle. Show that that means this is the formula I need to come up with, and we need to say, well, area is length times width. They told me my width is x. The length is going to come from whatever you got here in this problem. So when you solve this problem for y, that was the length. And then you will always end up solving. A little hint to help you when you get stuck. If you get stuck in this middle stuff, generally these numbers end up being integer numbers that you can find the answer by guessing and checking. So don't give up until you've guessed and checked. Like on the Unit 1 test, that was definitely a guess and check. Okay, I just want to go through a couple of these, give you some highlights, so if you get stuck. The graph of a quadratic function intersects the horizontal axis, that's the x-axis, at 1, 0, and the equation of axis symmetry is x equals -1. So what we know, that is a parabola that goes through this point and has symmetry at x equals -1. The thing about a parabola is whatever's this, however far it is on this side from the axis of symmetry, there's another point over here. So now you have another point that you can list from this information. And it even says that, write down the x coordinate of the other point or the graph. So if it's 2 away over here, you can go 2 away over here, you can make a little more detail. Okay, so that means we know a point here and we know a point here. And it says it reaches the maximum value at y equals 5. Well, you already know the x coordinate of the vertex. So this tells you some more information. That's 3 points now that you have. That allows you to come up with an equation or to answer another question about finding the range. So we're going to go smallest value to biggest value. So if it, or wherever your parabola is, the smallest value to the biggest value. So you figure out where the maximum is and you list your range values. Okay? 6 CDs, 3 video cassettes, 163.17, 9 CDs. This is just screaming. I'm not even going to go through. This is screaming at you. System of equations. Line up your variables, solve it, elimination. I'm not even going to talk to you about that. Okay, this one, 2 graphs, looks familiar. We got one function here that is there and one function here that is there. Looks a lot like the application problems. Their points they're going to ask you about are these intersection points, and then they're going to use, you're going to have to use those to talk about the graph. They're going to talk about above, below. So I would do is put this in my calculator and change the window so your x min is -3 and your x max is 3. Change that right away, and then go y min. You know, like it's going by 3, so I'd go -6 to 6. So you see the exact same window we're looking at right here. Write down the coordinates. That's find the intersection. So calculate intersection. Enter, and then move it close to that point. And it says the coordinates. So we're talking about a point, not an x value. And then it says write down the set of values of x for which f of x is less than g of x. F of x is this graph. Where is it less than g of x? Under is less than. So from here to here, you just found those coordinates. Now remember that we're talking about the set of values of x. So we're talking about the domain values of where that's true. And then the last thing is solve. And it says solve the equation for blah, blah, blah. This is just a straight up Algebra 1 problem. Be careful. Don't be silly. When you simplify this, this is not going to be a squared equation, so you don't need to factor and everything. So solve, get the x on one side, numbers on the other. You can, if you're not sure, if you don't believe it, plug it back in and see if it works. Factorize the expression. Write in factoring form. Find the positive solution of this. Notice it said equals 0, so they're saying solve and find the positive solution. Keeping going. I'm cruising before this video gets too long and you fall asleep. Which of these graphs of the following function has a y-intercept below the x-axis? Y-intercepts cross the y-axis. I'm not going to answer the question and let you figure it out. Passes through the origin. This is the origin. Does not cross the x-axis. So it never touches the x-axis. That would be thinking about the fact that means there are no zeros, so it doesn't have a real solution. Could not, or could be represented by the following diagram. So which one of these goes along with that? Now you have your graphing calculator. You graph these one at a time, and on your calculator, I don't know if you know this yet or not, because you're kind of ignorant with your calculator. I mean, you can put in multiple equations. So I'm putting in that equation, I'm going to put in the next one. But it might make a giant mess on your screen, especially if they're similar. So if you only want to look at one equation at a time, you go to the equal sign and hit enter. I don't know, it seems like a fairly easy command, but it's very complicated on the TI calculator. And so, and my window's all messed up, but you can at least see, okay, there's one of them. I can use that to answer the question. Does it go to the origin? Does it go to this? Is it all of that? All of the above? Maybe there's more than one right answer down here. Okay, so if you want to go back then and see, I want to see both of these together, then you could highlight it by hitting enter, and then you can see some other stuff. Okay, we keep moving. Last question has to do with shift. Getting your shift together here. So you're going to match up, basically entering these into your calculator and matching up, and then ultimately you are going to remember the shortcuts for how to graph. What things to ask yourself: if I have something, if I have some function and I'm taking something, squaring it and cubing it, whatever, what does this stuff inside the parenthesis do? What does this stuff outside the parenthesis do? What does a coefficient in front, what does that do? All those kind of things. Okay, so you have a checklist, things to get done. Figure out your life, put it together, go back. This should help you answer those questions. Awesome.